the one hand, computers has done a lot of good. It's brought communities together. Suddenly you feel much closer to people you've never met all over the world. You're sharing stories, you're sharing information. There's tons of good things. And at the same time, I could name a list which is just as long, whether it's of disinformation and who knows what. So I think in a very real way, AI is going to do both. AI presents a real opportunity to take some of the good things even further, and at the same time, it could be used, and it probably will also be used, in some negative ways. I am not particularly worried about an AI turning into some robot that turns into something that takes over the world and threatens all of us, but at the same time...
I'm curious with all the conflict in the world, all the challenges, the wars, all the things that are going on that are really important to mankind and humans across the globe. How do you see AI and technology impacting the goal of peace in this world?
Oh, that's a
I
hard question.
I know it doesn't, it could just be a concept that we explore. I'm curious because I see technology playing such an important role, and now I know how technology. I'll help talk through it so we can get to
That's good.
a thought process. I'm just curious because I see technology impacting the way the wars are fought today, significantly different than what we envisioned when we go back in history and look at World War II.
So,
But
so,
how does it help the other way?
so, I mean, one way to maybe think about it is, how has computers affected world peace or just big stories around the world? Because in a very obvious way, AI is taking that a step further. So on the one hand, computers has done a lot of good. It's brought communities together. Suddenly you feel much closer to people you've never met all over the world. You're sharing stories, you're sharing information. It's also helped sort of alert. So if something happens today, you're much more likely that a computer will pick up on some signal, and that gets routed much faster, and people can come and sort of help you. And even just like sharing information of somebody who has a disease on one side of the world and they found out that they have a... And I can give more and more examples along those lines. It's also helped in a large way sort of sometimes democracies to try and sort of get an edge or monitor bank transfers and things like that, and things that in the past were very difficult. It helps sort of reduce friction of financial systems. So there's tons of good things. And at the same time, I could name a list which is just as long, whether it's of disinformation and who knows what. So I think in a very real way, AI is going to do both. AI presents a real opportunity to take some of the good things even further. And at the same time, it could be used, and it probably will also be used, in some negative ways. I am a generally optimistic and hopeful person. And so I will say that I am not particularly worried about an AI turning into some robot that turns into something that takes over the world and threatens all of us. There's definitely a fear of being too reliant on AI. And there's companies, some of them we've invested in, some of them we've partnered with, which is like AI that monitors AI and stops it doing biases and skews and all that type of stuff. And there'll probably be some stories that people were like, I told you this was going to be terrible and the rest of it. But at the same time, in the 80s, when manufacturers were being put out of business because of machines, and they said soon the machines are going to take over, broadly, we're much happier today that you can buy a T-shirt for a few dollars and that you can get something delivered, like you mentioned, all the way to your house, and that things are being sort of produced at a very high level, such as cars. So like, I think we're overall quite happy with these so-called machines. So I think AI will be both good and bad, and my hope is much more good than bad.
If we look at it from the angle of the education component and how you could take someone earning $1,000 a month to $5,000 to $7,000 a month in under a year and allow them to change their lives, it can impact significantly on the earning potential. It also can cheapen the goods on a dramatic level because you can get sharper. If the computers are helping, to your point, find the next mountain in a better way constantly, and they're searching for better ways to scale a process, it's going to eventually, hopefully, reduce the price of goods and allow the inflationary challenges that people feel to maybe subside to some degree.
100%. I don't think that's a question. I think that will definitely happen. Like if we want
Yeah.
to take a finance angle at this, like so think about your average S&P 500 or 5,000 company. They've probably spent hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, writing just the software code lines that they now put in goodwill or brand or wherever they're putting that in. And that, if was built today, would probably cost under 10% to replicate. So I'm just taking that one obvious example, and there's a number of them as well. And that will naturally bring down the cost of goods and make things cheaper. It would take a cycle or two to get that out, but that's clearly going to happen.
Well, I geek out on all this stuff because I love, my whole path in life is if I can find a better way, then I need to find a better way. And it's sometimes, your greatest strengths turned up too loud, or are your blind spots. So for me, if I'm constantly searching for a better way, my wife and I talk about this all the time. I'm thinking 3 moves ahead. And sometimes you just need to be thinking about what you're going to have for dinner, not what you're going to have for dinner 3 nights from now. So I understand it can be a challenge, but I just got back from a group I'm a member of called the Genius Network out of Scottsdale, Arizona, with a bunch of entrepreneurs and leaders across the world, really. And it was so interesting. We had a company there that does newsletters, and their AI run newsletters, and everything that's been mechanical and monotonous and challenging is now done automatically for you. Another one is a clone, and it basically clones you take all of your persona and plug it in, and the clone can answer internal questions for your team. It can coach people with your voice, with your mentality, with the way that your books. It's super interesting to think of ways to help more people. So I think of it as impact, and we talked about this in the beginning. I think of it from the impact that you can make, and every time you can elevate your stage and you could create a larger impact on the world, it's really powerful. And I see that in AI. And I think I'm like you. I just want to see the optimistic side of it. I want to lean on positivity, not negativity here.
Yeah. So one of my favorite stories that I came across when researching for the book was, as weird as it sounds, I think it was in Indonesia, if I remember correctly. It was a small village that was being attacked by monkeys. And basically what was happening is that these monkeys would come in to the village and steal their food and run away. And the villagers didn't know what to do to try and trap these monkeys. And then they came up with this trap. And the idea of the trap was a small rock, or I think it was a coconut, that was sort of tied to the ground. And they made a hole, a relatively small hole in the coconut, where the monkey could fit its empty hand into the hole. And there was a nut that they knew the monkey would want. But the problem for the monkey was, once he put his empty hand in and grabbed the nut and made a fist, he couldn't get his hand back out. And so they could go off to the field and do whatever they were doing. They left these traps, and they would come back hours later to see then monkeys screaming with their hands stuck in the coconut, holding this nut. And the funny thing about it is, like, we humans will think about this and say, oh, these monkeys are so dumb. They could clearly just drop the nut and escape. But the monkey is not able to understand that it's better off giving up on the nut to get to a higher place, being a free monkey. Clearly, trapped monkey with a nut is not as good as free monkey without a nut. But the monkey is not capable of understanding that it needs to go down to give something up to get to a better point. All the monkey thinks is, I'm a monkey with a nut trapped, and if I let go of it, I'm monkey trapped without nut. So he can't conquer. But the reality is, us humans, we do the same thing the whole time. We are constantly in businesses or in different endeavors of our lives where we are holding on to some type of nut. Just take the examples we've spoken about. In Fosbury, when they were jumping, the other jumpers weren't thinking about, is there a better way than the scissor jump? In Netflix and Blockbuster, they had to get rid of their DVDs. Yes, it was their core source of income, but that was their nut. And this is a multi-billion-dollar company with probably all the McKinseys and Bains strategists, etc. But they needed to give up. They couldn't give up on their nut. And there's a variety of other stories that we go through where we find that us humans, and you talked about this a lot when you, to your point of breaking things or being willing to give up on something to build it better. Very, very often we find ourselves each holding a nut and asking ourselves, what nut are we holding that we have to let go of, is sometimes just the beginning of finding something dramatically better, to your point, to make a real impact.
You know, Judah, I'm super interested to talk to you because it's a topic that I'm really interested in personally. I'm excited. I bought your book. I was out of town when it came in, so I actually haven't had a chance to read it. Normally I try to, but I'm excited to read it because I heard that you flipped this into storytelling with a little Malcolm Gladwell edge, and it's took the technical and made it into something a little more interesting. So tell us a little bit about the book, and then we can talk AI, which I know everybody wants to hear.
Yes, so the goal of the book was really to try and teach what AI or how AI thinks, specifically around a very particular problem, which AI has got very good at and humans are not so good at. And the basic idea, really at the most basic level, is for many, many years, we humans have taught AI, computers, at the very beginning, just basic calculators, how to think. So the basics of computers start off with if, not, and, while. These are the basics of every computer. And what happened was we humans taught computers human logic. We taught computers how to think. And computers have now gotten so good at certain types of problems that it may be worth stopping and seeing if we humans can learn from the way AI now thinks. Maybe AI can teach us certain types of logic so that when we make our own decisions, career decisions, education decisions, entrepreneurship decisions, we think maybe we should take a little bit of the way AI solves problems into our own day-to-day lives. So that was the idea of the book. It focuses specifically on the idea of a local maximum, which is something that if you are a data scientist or a mathematician, you'll know immediately what it is. But it's really a very easy concept to understand. And the way to think about what a local maximum is to use the following analogy. So imagine you were dropped off in a desert and your goal is to reach the highest point, the highest altitude in the desert. Big Sahara Desert, sandy mountains all over, right? And so you dropped off, you got your backpack, you got your water, and you start looking around. At some point, you see a big mountain and you get excited and you think, that is the mountain I'm going to climb. And you start climbing up the mountain. It takes many hours. And I mean, I won't go through the whole sort of, but you get the picture, right? And then at the end of it, you get to the top of this mountain and you're happy, you're at a high point. But at that point, you realize there is a higher mountain behind it, next to it, somewhere you didn't see beforehand. And now you're trapped. You're at a very high point, but you're not at the highest point. In fact, you know there are better points out there that you just didn't see, didn't realize, didn't climb to. And the trap you're in now is the only way you can get to that higher point is climbing down from the mountain you're on. So this is called a local maximum. You're at a maximum. You can't go up any further from the point you reached, but it's not a global maximum. It's not the best place to be. It's a local maximum. And humans run into this the whole time. So think about somebody who's taken a job which is extremely well paid, but it's actually not something they really want to do in life. You talked earlier when we were off sort of line, you were talking about fate. What was our fate? So maybe somebody realizes I'm in a really good job. I'm paid really well, but this is not my fate. I'm in some type of golden handcuffs. I'm at the top of a mountain, but it's not the mountain I really want to be on. think about sports teams. They're playing a certain tactic. They're doing well, but actually to get better, they're going to need to go down, maybe not playing through this one player anymore. So AI has gotten so good at climbing mountains because it's gotten so quick because of computing power that engineers today spend an increasing amount of time. Actually, billions of dollars have been spent by Amazon, Google, Nvidia, Walmart, and the rest of them on trying to train their algorithms to identify in advance local maximums so that they know how to avoid them. And the idea of the book is really, how do we humans take some of this know-how so when we're making our own decisions, whether it's our careers, our businesses, our life partners, or whatever we're trying to do, how do we incorporate that into our own decision-making capabilities?
It's great. It's funny. I've never been afraid of technology, and I've never been afraid to find a better way or a higher mountain. And so when I'm looking at the concepts in your book and learning about you and what you are building, all I was thinking about is how I utilize AI every single day. And for me, the number one way that I use AI is to brainstorm. So I love to think, I love, as a visionary, I love to build ideas, right? Sometimes you get lost in the idea without the execution. So what I love about it is I build ideas inside of the AI, in ChatGPT, for example, and I vet those ideas. I ask for what other situations or ideas are out there like that? Who else is doing these things? What should I be reading? And it just starts, it's like a brainstorming session. Instead of Googling it and reading one article, it's an active connection between you know, two parts that are equally moving towards the same goal. And I find it to be just fascinating for me.
Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned that. One of the stories that I mentioned in the book is one by, I don't know if you've heard of Dick Fosbury. So Dick
No.
Fosbury, okay, so he was an American athlete who really liked sports and particularly high jump. And he talks about the fact that he was good at high jump, but not great. And he was just about making like his high school team and then college team. But the penny dropped when he realized that if he carries on down the same path that all the other high jumpers are jumping, which back then was the scissor jump, that means you run, 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 and try and sort of jump with your legs like scissors over the bar, he will never ever win. So he went home, and unlike all the others who were looking for small incremental improvements to get them that extra sort of half a centimeter, he went back to the drawing board and said, I need something completely different, completely different. And he talks about the process. He was also an engineer by background, which is why I like it. But he went back to the drawing board and he started thinking about other ways. And he came up with some really exotic ideas, one of which was then named after him the Fosbury flop, which is where you jump with your back over first and do what we know today.
Yep.
And as extreme as this may sound, the guy who was good, not great, only a couple of years later won the gold medal in Mexico Olympics. And it was thanks to this sort of idea of, rather than looking for a small incremental A/B testing improvement, take a step back and try and do something dramatically different. And this is something that AI teaches us. So if you were to look at how Google search works, so you mentioned Google search, you put something into the search. So Google has learned their AI algorithm that is using search to try and give you your best search results or the best answers to your query. It used to work in a very factual way, so sort of climbing a mountain very slowly. Today, in that half a second, Google is doing a brainstorm and experimenting completely different ideas. So if Scott looks for, like, I don't know, cool skiing holidays because we're coming up to Christmas, in that fraction of a second, Google will say, okay, we have the regular skiing options, but maybe there's something completely different. Like maybe he's looking for a winter holiday, but not necessarily skiing. Once upon a time, they wouldn't think that way. And given the way the AI algorithms have learned, they realized that even in that fraction of a second, they will run a wild brainstorm session and throw some random results out there as well.
That's great. Well, I'd love to see Google improve because I know I often Google health questions and things that I want to learn about, and I'm often disappointed in the results because never does it give you functional medicine ideas or individual things you could change your nutrition on, or it's always, the top five answers are exactly what, you would get if you went to your doctor. And I don't want those answers. I want to think outside the box. I want to break it and rebuild it. And I don't like traditional answers. And so, the entrepreneur brain really gets AI and the mentality because the way you're describing something is how I would look at any company. If I go into a company, I want to break it and rebuild it better. I don't want to bring it down to a level where it's not profitable, but I would want to bring it to a level where if we know it could be better tomorrow and I can see that other mountain, why am I continuing on the pace that I'm at now when I can exponentially enhance the value of where we stand today?
Yes, it was another story that I talk about in the book is between Blockbuster and Netflix, which I know is a very sort of famous case study. But frankly, I think that a lot of whether it's the Harvard professors who've written about it and other very distinguished scholars, I think some of them might have got it wrong. So when you read about the case studies, they'll tell you, well, it's because that Blockbuster had all these late fees that they were trying to collect, and they'll do all that type of analysis. To me, there was one quote which was given by the Blockbuster CEO and head of innovation. So the two people who really should have seen this Netflix beast coming, and they gave this quote a year before they went bust. So it was like they were still thinking they're ahead of the curve, only a year later to go bust. And their quote was something, I don't remember it off by heart, but I put it in the book, but it was something like, we still don't understand this fascination with Netflix. We have everything Netflix has at Blockbuster and more. And I think the key word there is they said, and more. So it's true, they had streaming, they had a whole bunch of movies, but the problem is they also had tons of stores that nobody wanted to visit, tons of DVDs that nobody wanted to rent, tons of employees that were doing things that were irrelevant. And what they weren't willing to do, to your point, is break all of this stuff that was actually pulling them up the wrong mountain. And so if I had to do the analogy, you had Netflix much lower down, but at the bottom of a much taller mountain, the streaming business, and Blockbuster at the top of a mountain, higher up, but at a mountain that was the wrong mountain. It was buy DVDs rental business. So Netflix was down here and Blockbuster was up here, but these guys were on the wrong mountain and these guys were climbing the right mountain. And what Blockbuster would have had to have done was go through the painful process, which is sometimes more difficult than just climbing a mountain, but of going down the mountain they were on, giving away all of this sort of stuff that they've accumulated that was actually at that point not the right mountain when you looked into the future, to be able to compete with Netflix.
That's a great example. I think of Best Buy as somebody that's done it effectively because they kind of went through these growing pains, and you could see it because I used to buy a lot of things from them, and then I started buying everything from them for the business because there was a local store close, but you could also order it online, and they gave a reward for any type of business account. You automatically guaranteed that you would get free, fixing and whatever it was. And there were so many big benefits, but they altered their moves internally. And even though you felt it as a customer, I also felt it was getting better. Amazon is another. I think Amazon's at a point where they're no longer delivering everything in 2 days or less. And that's a challenge because people are used to it now. And so this on-demand mentality, I was explaining to my uncle just last night. He's like, "How come this Amazon stuff I'm ordering and it's not coming in 2 days? How come some things say it's December 7th?" And he has no concept because he doesn't use it very often. And I'm explaining that, if they're in the warehouse, they could ship it immediately. But if it's not, it's a perfect example of how do you adjust or change course when you know that there has to be something better. And I really, really like the concept of thinking.
It's just I like what you just said now. So one of the other things I mention and talk about is trading off muscle and agility. So you can all imagine going to the gym and you've got that one guy who is literally just doing bench presses, and that's all that guy does. And like we can all imagine that individual, right? He doesn't do anything else in the gym. He's just bench pressing, and even when he does bench pressing, it's like 3 reps of like massive weights. And then there's the other one who's the all rounder. So he's not as good, obviously, at the bench pressing, but he's doing a bit of agility and stretching and sort of cardio and everything like that. So now they're going to compete. If the competition is bench pressing, we all know who's going to win that. Okay, it's the first guy. But if the competition starts to change and suddenly it's something completely different, it's a hurdle race. You're running and doing hurdles like nobody expected that. We all know the second guy will win. We don't even know what the first guy and the second guy looks like, but it's the second guy who's going to win that. And in a world that we live in today, where one day it's COVID, the next day everybody's on Zoom, the next day some big regulation comes out, what we see is consistently the agile outperforms the muscular. And by the way, it's the case with software too. So if you look at GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT-4, anybody wants, you can literally look this up online. You can see how many neurons each of these new large language models have and how many layers. Typically, layers correlates with muscle. It means that it's crunching it again and again. And the breadth of the layers correlates with agility. And what the data scientists are learning is that agility outperforms muscle. If you look at GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3, obviously everything is going up, but the thing that is going up faster is actually the agility more than the muscle. We see this in software and we see this in humans. Over long periods of time, it's the agile that will outperform the muscular.
It's so powerful. And when you think about it, it's the power of the pivot, right? The ability to pivot and adjust course is agility. And any great business, any great relationship, anything, these challenges appear, and it's the inability to change course when you see it that is often how you become antiquated and old. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
it's interesting. Go ahead.
So just about that, so like just to give an example, so we're a venture capital firm. We invest in startups. We've got about 40 startups in the portfolio, and COVID hit, and suddenly you would have thought, okay, the ones doing telemedicine, online sort of services would be the ones that really succeed, and the ones doing travel, real estate would really struggle. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of truth to that, and we saw some of these succeed very much so, and these struggle. But looking back now, 3 years later, the agile startups, regardless of the industry they were in, were the ones that said, hang on a moment, the ground has shifted, and they adjusted regardless of the sector and vertical they were in, and they're succeeding today more than they did before. And the more fixated mindset, founders, muscular sort of approach to things are the ones that, again, some were lucky and some were very unlucky, but broadly speaking, those are the ones that 3 years later, looking back, are struggling.
It's a great point. How do you see, let's bring it down to the everyday. How do you see AI impacting children? And when I use children, I mean all the way up through education levels of college, et cetera. How do we see this kind of impacting the next generation? Because I know that I have friends who think that it's cheating if their kids are utilizing AI, and I firmly believe the opposite. I believe that if they're leveraging and utilizing a tool that's going to be something that everybody's going to need to understand how to use, that they should be leveraging and utilizing it to the full capabilities. Now, it doesn't mean that they're leveraging it to not to just get the answers. That's results oriented. That's not researching and developing and identifying. But in some ways, I feel like the AI is allowing them to do more of the work than they normally would have done if they just read the back of a book, went to a page, wrote it in the research paper, and then never remembered it as long as they live. It's interactive. So I'm interested in your concept of where you see that going.
It's a great question. I feel very confident in my high level approach, which I will describe. And when it comes to the practical sort of day to day, I can give you a direction, but I think that comes down to the teachers. So the high level approach, I would say, is I hear a lot of, I mean, my mum's a headmaster. My grandmother was a teacher. Like we have a lot of teachers in our family, and I totally understand the fear and notion that this is now going to change everything and it's a cheating tool. You mustn't do that. Here's my counter argument. So 50 years ago, you used to teach students how to calculate using beads. So you need to do like, I don't know, 55 times whatever. You're moving beads, you're working it out. Along comes the calculator. Now, what do? Do you still want to spend literally tens or maybe hundreds of hours of kids the ages of, I don't know, 14, 15, 16, 17, teaching them to do the beads so they fully understand how to do 55 times, I don't know, 7, rather than in their head or on a calculator? You could. And there may be some type of incremental benefit to knowing how to use the beads. The reality is today, I think it's 99.999% of the students out there, when it gets to a certain level of math, they're doing it on a calculator. It's important that they understand the basics. So 2 times 3 is being taught. That means 2 3s and maybe even 7 times 7. But at some point, we move over to a calculator. Let's take that step further. When it comes to complex, I don't know, Excel sheets, we could teach people to do that on a pad and a pen. It could work. And you know what? 20 years ago, that's how accountants worked. You wanted to do your home finance? You did it with papers, scratching out, calculating everything together. There's an extra line that you have to add. You could do that all by pen and paper. Today, my guess is maybe it's not 99.999, but the vast majority are going to use some form of Excel. It doesn't have to be Excel or some type of program. You still have to learn the basics. So you still want to understand that Excel is aggregating these, putting them together. But when a new line item comes, you literally want to be able to punch it in and press enter. And you can see where I'm going with this, but like we're getting to a stage where doing certain things purely manually because, I don't know, the teachers just like teaching the same curriculum year over year. It's not giving your students the right leg up into the real world. Do I think everything should be scrapped and students shouldn't ever know anything or at all and they just have to prompt GPT or something like that? No. We still understand the basics of math before it went into a calculator. We understand the basics of an Excel. But these things have made humans infinitely more productive. And so I envision a situation where everything, if you're writing code, it will be AI assisted. If you want to improve your writing, you can write the way you like. You can say to the AI, don't touch it. I want to be super creative. If you want AI to help you, or maybe just make it look really pretty on a page, or turn it into a PowerPoint presentation automatically, learn how to prompt that. That will be a likely useful tool. So big picture, I think technology is moving. Calculator, Excel, AI, these things are going to happen. Teachers should adjust. It doesn't mean you lose all of the basics. We didn't do that, lose it with the calculator. We didn't lose that with Excel. We shouldn't lose that with AI. But allowing people to progress means teaching people how to use these things to make them more productive.
Yeah, I always feel like the lost art of education is curiosity. So at the end of the day, if our educators are teaching curiosity, then what's inevitable is the tools that allow us to learn what we're interested in quicker allow us to actually expand our mindset really, really fast. And guess what we often do? Every adult has done this. At some point in time, you learn where we are now only to go back and learn where we came from. See, if you teach curiosity and you get them to where they want to go, how many people in our generations and beyond study World War II or other historical battles and things that shaped the culture of history throughout the world? And why is it more interesting as we get older? Because we understand that it's not just what we see in front of us, that it's very, very layered. And those layers of muscle, as you go down into curiosity, become something inevitably that people that want to go to the next level will seek. And I think that sticking to the traditional mindset sometimes is the ultimate weakness, and it's scarcity at its finest. It's concern that somebody has to do it this way because we've always done it this way. And I've been in the financial services industry for 23 years, and I do a ton of M&A where I purchase traditional practices, transition them into the next generation, allow the next gen advisors to come in and take over, and we develop strategies and scale and all kinds of things that really build, right? But the challenge is where practices, where people struggle to actually bring the next generation up and in, is where they try to get them to do the exact same thing parallel to what they did to get where they are. And that is insanity. It doesn't work. And, and wealthy families, the last point I'll make is wealthy families for generations have learned this skill. Successful, wealthy families do not make their children do the same things that they did when they came from the Great Depression. They might teach them the lessons of that, but they allow them to escalate and elevate from there. And that to me is what AI is doing to our world today if we leverage and utilize it in an appropriate manner.
No, well, first, it's a great point, and I'll say that I think one of the big benefits of AI for education is it's lowering barriers and allowing people who previously couldn't get into a certain field to make it potentially much easier. So I'll give an example. Again, one of the stories I talk about in the book is a non-profit in Israel called Tech Korea, and they take Ethiopians who have no technical background. Okay, some of them haven't studied basic math, some of them don't know English. And these are individuals who typically are in jobs like working in a gas station. And what they do is they take roughly 150 of them a year. So this is not a small number. And within 10 months, 93% of them will get a job in high tech, which is unbelievable if you think about the individual who was making, I'll give you some of the numbers, the individual who was making roughly $1,500 to $2,000 a month doing their first job will be making somewhere between 5 and 8 only 10 months later. And one of the things that Takala, the CEO, mentioned to me is that only in technology can this happen. And actually AI has made it easier because thanks to AI, they are finding ways to teach people skills that they can then go and be like a front-end developer, QA, or any one of these jobs, he said, with AI, he said, I can take these individuals who have no background, but bring them to the playing field of somebody who may have 20 years, but the 20 years has been in an old environment, and the environment has changed so much that I can get these Ethiopians into high tech. Now, it's not the cutting edge jobs, but the fact that they move from that mountain, which was very sort of peaked, to one where now for the rest of their career, hopefully their salary is scaling much faster than inflation, tremendously faster than inflation, is an enormous opportunity. And AI could do this for many different verticals in education. I would argue that M&A would be potentially a similar one, where if tools enter the M&A market, which make a lot of the things that people used to do, accounting, etc., just semi-automated, definitely if it was fully automated, suddenly you wouldn't have to teach somebody all of that, and they can focus on the small bits of the business that is really where the value is being added.
Yeah, you made a point earlier. Just think of, as you were talking about managing finances, I was thinking of being a college age kid and taking every receipt I ever had and plugging it in manually to Microsoft Money. And then at the end of every iteration, having to download the old version, update it to the new version. And if you weren't tedious like that, you just didn't manage your budget. Like it was very difficult to do things in a different way. Today, you can use Monarch or Microsoft. I think Money might still exist in some capacity. Quicken has some stuff. I mean, Rocket Money. These are things that people use, and it connects to your accounts, automatically targets it, automatically puts it in the right path for you. So, oh, this is a health and expense. This is a business expense. And all of a sudden now the everyday person can budget, can manage, can track, can have accountability. Our health is the same way. I wear a Whoop and I wear a iWatch. And both of them give me data that helps me make better decisions every day for my health. These are all technologies that are adding to shorten the gap between the difference between my brain's ability to understand heart rate variability and the other things, and actually how I'm executing and making decisions based on the data.
Yeah, well, I mean, just curious. So, like, not so long ago, if you wanted to have your own heart rate data, and the gap between the extreme wealth and the people who had no clue about any of this was pretty big. But now the cost, and again, it's not cheap to buy some of those watches, but it's definitely affordable. And the average sort of American or citizen can afford this. And it's really intuitive. You plug in, you download some type of app, and you get it. So I think it's really being democratized, a lot of these high-end capabilities.
Yeah, it's taking the complex and simplifying it. And anytime you do that, I think the ultimate example is the iPhone. There's nothing better than when the iPhone came out. I was so I had the HTC Touch. I did not understand how to use it. I was not techie in that capacity. iPhone came out and it was intuitive. When the MacBook came out and it was the newer versions, if you wanted to send an email, you could just click on the email. Like if you wanted, like send was easy. Everything was intuitive. You can simplify complex things and everybody can get on the same playing field. And I think it's such a great point that you're making. And I think a great point for us to wrap up the conversation. I think we could talk all day, but I know you are at the end of your evening. You still have another meeting to go to. So I'm very grateful for your time this evening. How do people find you, Judah? I know the book is everywhere, but tell everyone where they can find this super good book here, How to Move Up When the Only Way is Down, Lessons from Artificial Intelligence for Overcoming Your Local Maximum.
Amazing. Thank you. It's on Amazon.com. It's on judahtaub.com. Yeah, it's out there. It's on Wiley, and there's a variety of other places as well. But typically, Amazon is where people go.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much, Scott.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.